Hi, I'm Royce Morales. I am a transformational facilitator, spiritual teacher, author of 3 books, and radio show host on Listen Up with Royce Morales. Today, I'm going to continue my discussion about talking about your consciousness, the 3 parts of your consciousness. And I talked a lot in the first 2 episodes about what I refer to as your fear-based consciousness or your lower self. And I mentioned how the lower self gets programmed during decision-forming incidents, moments of pain or loss or unconsciousness. Those moments having us make decisions about ourselves and others and life. And from then on, we are programmed subconsciously to believe that that is true because we generalize it. And we start living that way, and we start perceiving things in that way. And we start attracting things to prove that we're right, simply because the fear-based consciousness likes to have evidence that what it decided was correct. And energy just follows that and shows up in our life repeatedly. So we have further evidence that we can be right. So today, I'm going to talk about some ways that we can get in touch with our fear-based consciousness and give it a little less power over our life. But before I get into that, I want to talk about the real bottom line core way to disprogram or unprogram our fear-based consciousness, that hard drive that's running us, just like a computer. Because I have compared it to a computer. All that stuff gets programmed in, and a button gets pushed, and all that stuff gets re-stimulated, reactivated, triggered, and we start having all kinds of weird reactions. I talked about that in the last episode. So the first thing that we need to do to really get in touch with those programs and resolve them is to start remembering those decision-forming incidents. The best way to do this, and I know that, this is not a commercial to call me up, but really the best way to do it, because it is so subconscious, is to have some private work with me, because I'll help you dig up the source or the roots of your programs in those decision-forming incidents that are tucked way back there in your subconscious mind. So getting in touch with remembering those incidents is the first step. Feeling them, allowing yourself to feel the emotions, because sometimes those emotions have been pushed down as well. So maybe you were sad or angry or whatever during those incidents, and you never let yourself fully feel them. Those emotions need to be felt and released in order to really resolve those memories. The third thing to do is to determine all that you decided about yourself and others and life. So I decided that men can't be trusted, or women are violent, or I can't take care of myself, or life is scary. And like I've said before, there could be a lot of decisions that you made right then. And the last thing to do is to discover the higher consciousness, the spiritual, or what your higher self wants you to learn from that experience. What was the lesson? What was the teaching? How did that experience awaken you in some way to your purpose, why you're really here? And it may seem kind of contradictory, because those experiences of pain and loss certainly don't seem like teachers, but they always are. Because on some level, your higher consciousness chose this life, chose those experiences, so you could get in touch with the truth about yourself. So those are the 4 steps that I do when I do some inner work with people. And I, of course, recommend doing that highly. Now, if you're going to get in touch with your lower self, and you want to help it have less power in your life, there's some more superficial things that you can do as well. And I'm going to just kind of rattle them off. First way, and this, by the way, will help you to establish a real positive relationship with your fear-based consciousness, your lower self. Keep in mind that your lower self is like a child. I've compared it to a child before, but getting in touch with it and having a relationship with it is a really powerful, very empowering step to take, because like a bratty child living in the house with you, it wants and needs certain things. So by doing this, it's going to stop acting out as much. It's going to behave a little bit better. It's going to be more disciplined. So the first thing to do is to start communicating with it. And because it is a child, communicate with it in simple ways, using simple, direct language. And it's going to start communicating back with you. And I'll explain that in a second. But you can do this verbally. You can do it with your thoughts. You can do it in your journal. I probably don't recommend doing it in person because people might look at you strangely. Who are you talking to? Oh, my lower self. But you can do this in a very subtle way. I've had people go to the bathroom and sit there and have long conversations with their lower self. I like to do it in a journal format, or even just talking to my husband about it because he understands all of this. So communicate, tell it exactly what you want to say to it, and again, keep it very simple. I find that giving your lower self a name sometimes helps to differentiate between your other consciousness parts. Please don't call it shithead or something negative. Give it a loving, endearing name, something that you will recognize and something that it will recognize as well. Now, I know it sounds bizarre to be talking to yourself in this way, but your consciousness really is 3 different aspects. And so talking to it and giving it a name is a very wonderful, empowering thing to do. And it's going to lessen its control in your life. The second thing to do is to ask your lower self, ask your fear-based consciousness how it feels about certain things, especially if you're about to do something that you think might be a little bit scary for it. So let it express how it feels. So for example, you were invited to a party, and logically speaking, you may not think that it's a scary thing to go to a party. You've gone to lots of parties before, but maybe you're noticing that every time you go to a party, you get drunk, or every time you go to a party, you act out in some way, or you have buttons that get pushed. So talk to your lower self about that. Okay, lower self, we're invited to a party. How do you feel about that? And your lower self is going to let you know, as long as you allow it to. So it might say, well, every time we go to a party, you make a fool of yourself. And every time we meet people at a party, it ends up just being awful. So let your lower self just dump how it's feeling. And don't argue with it. Just listen compassionately, because a child just wants to be heard. A child just wants to have a safe place to let out how it feels about things. More you allow it to express, the happier it will be. It might sound bizarre again, but just let it say how it feels. Your job as you're listening to this is to just listen with compassion and to kind of determine what it is that it's really saying. So it might be saying all these things about getting drunk at parties, but what it's really saying is that you're making a fool of yourself, or you have a button about being a failure or being unable to be responsible in situations. So determine what the real issue is, because that's going to help you in your inner work. It's like, wow, I'm noticing that every time I go to a party, I have this belief that I just don't know what to say around people or whatever. And I have a belief that I'm stupid. So there's something that it symbolizes to you. So take a look and kind of determine what that is. The third thing to do is to notice how you're seeing yourself and your world, because the lower self, the fear-based consciousness, sees everything in a negative way. So start to notice that I'm just looking at everything negatively. And what is that about? Start doing a little digging. You might notice it in all kinds of ways. You might notice it at work. You might notice it in your relationship. You might notice it with your kids. So really, how are you seeing everything in a negative, fear-based way? And part of that is to acknowledge the positive as well. So you might want to realize that, okay, even though I'm seeing everything in a negative way, I did a good job last week on that report from my boss. Or I cooked a wonderful dinner for my husband and my family last week. So acknowledge the positive as well, not to suppress the negative, because That's not what this is about, in case you haven't noticed. It's not about suppressing anything. It's about observing and being mindful and aware of what's going on with your lower self. But it's a good idea to just see the positive as well. Gee, I'm noticing that I had some growth in that area. The next thing to do is to recognize how your lower self, how your fear-based consciousness is holding you back. So, needless to say, it's going to want to stop you in all kinds of ways. It won't want you to take that risk. It won't want you to get that new job. It won't want you to move out of your comfortable zone that you're in. That comfy zone is something that your lower self loves to be in. So notice it and don't buy into it. Take a risk. I can't even tell you how many times I tell students to do that. There is nothing to lose. It's just your beliefs and your fears that are stopping you or convincing you that you shouldn't take a risk. So take a risk, because what's going to happen is every time you do that, you're kind of busting some of the evidence that the lower self believes about fear. I used to have a tremendous fear about walking in the snow. And I forced myself one time to go to the snow and just walk around in it. And I found that as I did that, some of that evidence that I believed was scary was not scary. So I took that little tiny risk, and it really helped me in a lot of ways. And it also helped me feel more courageous in general in my life. So that stuff will kind of expand as you kind of push yourself, even to take little baby steps. It's important to do. Now, the next thing I'm going to ask you to do is kind of silly, but it's really wonderful. And that is to ask your lower self, ask your fear-based consciousness to do simple things for you. For example, you can ask it to wake you up in the morning, or find a parking space, or pay your bills on time, whatever it is, even if it's just a simple thing like that, ask it. Because if you have children, you'll know that when you give a child at a certain age responsibility, they really rise to the occasion. They love it. Once they hit teenage, they don't. But when they're young enough, they really enjoy having those little tasks. It makes them feel responsible and grown up and loved and cared about. Same thing with your lower self. The problem with it is that sometimes, because your lower self is trying to keep you safe, it may do just the opposite of what you've asked it to do. Now, don't get mad at it if it does that. If you tell it to wake you up at 7 and it wakes you up at 9 and you miss that important meeting, just find out what the fear was that got in the way of your lower self helping you. And by the way, make sure to always have a backup plan, have the alarm set anyway. But, ask your lower self to do those things, and it will really surprise you. I had a student one time that was trying to quit smoking, and he asked his lower self to help him with that. And it was a really interesting experience, because it really helped, because he phrased it in such a way that it's like, you know what, your smoking is really inhibiting my survival. So try to help me with this. And it did, and it helped him stop smoking. So it's an amazing little thing to try. The last thing I would recommend doing in terms of establishing a really wonderful relationship with your fear-based consciousness is to give it love, kindness, and positive reinforcement. Children thrive on that. So whatever that means to you in your life, it could mean giving it a reward. It could mean taking it to a movie. It could mean giving it ice cream. It could mean buying a new outfit. Whatever it takes, do something that symbolizes love and kindness and positive reinforcement to your lower self. Now, in terms of taking it to a movie or something like that, ask your lower self what it wants to see. It might surprise you. And make sure to let it choose the movie and let it choose the dessert or whatever it is. So, along with all of those things, notice your lower self reactions to things. Notice what pushes your buttons and throws you into a triggered state. And really be observant of all of that. Notice your beliefs, as I was saying before. Notice the judgments, the beliefs that start reciting in your brain as you go through your life. Notice the manipulation that you're trying to do of other people. Notice the patterns, etc. What is the repeated story or excuse that you keep giving yourself? All of those things are your lower self trying to convince you to stay safe, trying to keep you safe. That's what it's about for your lower self. And by being mindful of all that, noticing all of that, you're going to start to really recognize when your lower self is in charge. And you'll notice that you don't have to buy into all of that. The most important thing, as I keep saying, is to get to the root, get to the core, get to where you decided those things that have programmed you so you can really resolve them. And I am available to do that. Just reach out to me. It's easy to find me, roycemorales.com, and all my information is in the description in this video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to reach out to me in the comments, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. I'll be posting a lot more of these videos, so stay tuned and stay aware.